Hello everyone. It is my great pleasure to introduce to you someone very special I was searching for a bit, because there is a lot of misinformation in the internet and quite fragmented information about George Adamski Foundation. But I found someone, and is a director of George Adamski Foundation, has impressive background and is related to Adamski family for quite a long time. So today I introduce to you Glenn Steckling. Hi Glenn, how are you?
Hello, Joanna. It's a pleasure to be with you and your listeners and viewers. I always enjoy interacting with the public whenever possible.
That's fantastic. We need to start from somewhere. So how about we will start from the very beginning. I really found like 5 minutes here information, 5 there, and then finally I found you. It wasn't easy. I admit, I had to do some research here, although everybody probably by now heard about George Adamski Foundation. But when you click on it, there is like so much in internet and you don't go directly to the source. So whatever they talk about foundation, they don't put an address, a link to your website. They don't state your email address. So it's not really clear. But today we will make it very clear. And we put all the information directly to you if someone will like to contact you and bring more understanding about this topic, because there is so much. People are scared. Some have great extraordinary experiences with extraterrestrials, with so-called UFO, and some are just scared because there is quite scary information there. But we will get to that. So you are related to George Adamski from your childhood, right?
Yes, we had a very close association with George. To give you a brief overview, my parents grew up in Germany during the war, and they were war survivors as children. But during the war, there was a number of these spacecrafts sighted and photographed. Now, to be clear, these photographs go back as far as 1918. So there's a false projection out there that these crafts are the construct of the Nazi Germany scientists at Peenemünde. And that's not true, because the Germans didn't come into power until 1933. And in 1939, they opened Peenemünde, and then they started to fly some crafts that looked basically familiar until 1941, but they did not perform, and it was basically a failed project. So that entire section of misinformation that these are all German constructs and then other militaries is completely false. So they saw some of these craft, and my father used to have a large chart, and he would put pins in wherever there were reported UFOs. And during that time, the American and the British squadrons, bombing squadrons, would describe what we would call as Foo Fighters, or those green-orange globes that would fly in formation alongside the aircraft and monitor the situation. And so that was very common in areas of conflict, World War II, the Middle East, Afghanistan. There has been a plethora of UFO sightings because they're watching what we're doing and how we're behaving. So my parents came first to Canada, where I was born, and then 6 months later to the US. And we had seen some of these crafts in Denver, Colorado already in 1962. And so we moved in 63 to Washington, D.C. And my father was offered an executive chef position in the Mayflower Hotel, which is a very famous place. All the politicians go. It's right up the street from the White House. And in March of 63, we saw one of these crafts that was hovering over downtown Washington, D.C. This is just a small model that was given to all the original 6 co-workers. It is not exactly correct, because it's designed that way so somebody who finds it or acquires it by mistake cannot use it to fake film. And so you can right away, when you see this, you can right away know that it's not exactly correct. But we saw this craft at about 1,200 feet above downtown Washington, D.C. And there were 30 other witnesses, including a newspaper reporter for the Washington Daily News. And it was reported in the newspaper the next day. And so my father said, well, we've seen quite a few of these. Let's go find out. So he went to the Library of Congress, went alphabetically Adamski, pulled out the first book, Flying Saucers Have Landed, with Desmond Leslie, Sir Desmond Leslie. And inside were clear photographs of these type of craft taken by telescope and by camera. And eventually George ended up with probably about half a dozen movie film footages for all over the country and world of these UFOs. And so he corresponded with George, who was coming out to lecture to the Air Force Reserves a few months later, and we met him. And we became very good friends with George and ended up not only working together with him, seeing the crafts at the residence out in Silver Spring, Maryland, and also meeting some of his contacts, who we had the honor of maintaining those friendships for many, many years thereafter. And so the foundation came about after George passed away in 1965, and he's buried in Arlington National Cemetery simply because he served in the U.S. Cavalry in 1917, and only service personnel are allowed to be buried in Washington National Cemetery. And Alice Wells, who was one of his longtime students and friends and confidants, insisted upon that, and President Johnson acquiesced to it. And then we later inherited in the 70s the foundation, and we took care of Alice and everything like that for the next 10 years until she passed away. And my father worked diligently in this field. And in the 60s, my father was invited to NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, Dr. Lohman, between 22 scientists, panel, to not only show these films, but to show the film that he took in Germany when we were traveling on the train during our lecture tour in Germany in '66 from Mannheim. And alongside of the
Sorry,
yeah.
I'm from Mannheim now.
Yeah, there you go. And so the train, you know, in those days, the German trains, you had to hold the windows down. They were spring-loaded down. So I was holding the window down. All the people were lined alongside of us in the train looking out. And my father was filming this fleet of UFOs appearing in the sky behind the trees as the train moved. And this film appeared in German national television and not too long thereafter. And all of NASA wanted to see it. 3 months later, Colonel Freeman and the Pentagon invited us to go there, and they talked about it. And Colonel Freeman says that these were some of the best films he had ever seen in civilian hands. And not in military hands, but in civilian hands. And so we were saturated in this field when it was very real. There was none of this, or very little of this, fearful misinformation that started to progress after 1961. And this fearful information, this caveat, in order to scare people, was a purposefully orchestrated event by the powers of this world to discourage us from any type of interaction with benevolent extraterrestrials. And it has worked. It was called a foolproof plan, and it has been proven to pretty much be that, because we insist on behaving like fools. And so so we dealt with scientists and politicians. I have myself done the same in the years thereafter. And none of these people have anything to do with this so-called circus, this melange of misinformation and disinformation that continues to circulate now in the UFO community. Most of this is perpetrated by the UFO community itself, not from official sources. Originally, yes, official sources tried very hard in the 40s and 50s, early 60s to deny and to intimidate the men in black and so on and so forth.
Sorry, let me ask you right there, because you presented it to NASA they saw it, the military was impressed, yet they didn't show the public. They denied everything, right?
Well, what happened was, if you remember correctly, right now we have a certain individual who enjoys the public spotlight and likes to set up these so-called disclosure hearings, which is a fantasy. There will never be truthful disclosure, never. And it's very simple, because the powers that be have worked so hard over periods of 30 to 40 years to disclaim it. And then the afterwards 40 years to move that disclaimer into our space program and field, so people feel that there's no life beyond this planet. So this whole agglomeration of stories, like an accordion being pushed together. And so that is, they're never going to deny it. Like, for instance, Secretary of State Rumsfeld, when he was a congressman during the 68-69 hearings, told the investigators they do not have the right to know. Senator Barry Goldwater, a general, attempted to get the information. The Air Force and the CIA denied it. Speaker McCormick of the House of Representatives, the highest person in the speakerhood, third in line to the president, they denied it. Half a dozen other, because they're not going to give out the information. They have no intention of telling you.
What was the reasoning? Was it to manipulate humankind? Why this information for such a long time was not revealed, not discussed? Because that created even more misinformation about this disclosure, about people are scared. That misinformation actually provided more fear among the people. So, of course, if you want to manipulate people, you need fear, right?
Oh, so absolutely. Absolutely. To put it very plainly, the entire society is subjected to the use of fear. You're fearful when you go to your education. You're fearful when you go to your job. You're to keep it. You're fearful for your income. You're fearful of the market and how it'll affect your ability for your mortgages and your retirement. You're fearful when you get older that they don't take it away from you. Fear is the overlying construct of how we manipulate the masses on this planet. And it's basically psychology 101. It's the very basics of it, and it works tremendously. Now you add the media, which is in collusion with this, and all the sci-fi movies. For you may not know, there was a book called Hollywood versus the Flying Saucer, and they uncovered that the intelligence community had offices directly opposite the Hollywood studios, and every single sci-fi manuscript had to clear their adjustments first. So that's why you find very few films. The only one that I can think of any great magnitude was the very first movie, The Day the Earth Stood Still, which is about 90% correct. It is 90% correct. And so when we went to NASA, the scientists asked my father about how many human beings from other worlds are walking amongst us. And my father took a piece of paper and wrote down the number, and the scientist wrote down his number, and they exchanged the papers, and they were about the very same number. So they were well aware that people are walking amongst us from other worlds. They're well aware that they're not monsters, they're not reptilians, they're not crayfish, they're not Sasquatch, they're none of these fantasies. And that's what they are, fantasies. They are aware that human beings of intelligence walk amongst us, and they know it.
What are the races that walk around us, and what is the number?
The races in the cosmos, well, let's first take a snapshot of our own world. If we look at, let's say, the pygmies or the Kalahari bush people, they're pretty short. They're about 4 feet tall, right? But anatomically, bodily, they're just the same as you and I. They're just smaller people. Now you go to the Watusi, and the Watusi 7 foot tall. We even have on record, if you go and look in research somewhere, type into the internet the tallest person, he was just short of 9 feet tall. And so we have this disparity of people in height, which is normal. We have disparity in people in eye color, skin color, hair color, but they're still human beings. From all the indications that I have found over the decades, there are 4 types: humans, humanoid, robotic, which looks like a gray, and android, which has 4 fingers. That's the only way you can tell them apart. But they are no species. Anybody who tells you that they are seeing 150 or 200 species, and I know these clowns all are out there running around with this, they are absolutely telling you false information. The scientists I talked to, one of the most highly regarded ones in the government, who is now retired, we had a conference in southwestern United States, out in New Mexico, and we were at his house, and he had a lot of his friends over, and we had a little symposium, and we showed the films, and we had a talk. And he says to me, he says, people are so absolutely foolish and ignorant of their own biological advancement. He says, you are constructed and able to do anything. You can construct machines to fly through air, devices to go into space, to go underwater. All the other species are limited within the environment upon which they are created. You do not see whales crawling out of the ocean and building 747s. You do not see reptiles coming out of the swamp and starting to build microchip computers. He says this is all fantasy, which I told him, I said, I've been saying that for the last 50 years and many of us for even longer. And
can I ask you, because may we a little bit slow down, because that's very interesting what you're talking about those 4 types and the grays and humanoids. And of course, on our channel here with people, and Polish people, English speaking people, we talk and discuss our experiences, which are very often extraordinary. So maybe you can bring some more your comment on it, because, for example, when I was passing through Cologne, I met 2 scientists, and they were very inviting me, like they have new technology, and I took it like, okay, that's nonsense. And they have to present it, they want to present it in Cologne, and I went away. But then I had a dream that their skulls were crystal, colorful crystals. Is it possible? It's just a dream, but is it possible that some of those races, like you say, androids, robotics, they could have a different structure of the skull?
Well, if we look at the reality of crystals, a crystal is a neutral device. In other words, you can embed a frequency into it by the alignment of the atoms. It has to be done artificially. By nature, the crystal is a neutral device, and it is nothing more than a magnifying glass. And the power that you feel coming through the crystal is your power, not the power of the crystal. Your power is magnified through that crystal and then projects itself out. If you take that crystal away from your body and put it away, it becomes once again neutral for the next person. If the crystal has been aligned to your frequency, and I have one of those that does not come from this world, then it has a greater projection force, but once again, it comes from yourself, not from the crystal itself. So first of all, we have to make clear that everybody that's running around in crystals and feeling something is nothing more than feeling their own power and their own thought projection.
So it's a transmitter of energy, crystal. We talk about pure crystal. Not about healing stones, just the crystal, because there are so many types. Can you show us the crystal? Is it possible?
Yes, I can.
Somewhere there, you have it somewhere there. You probably didn't know we are going to talk about it, but we are going to talk about so many topics here.
This crystal belonged to George Adamski, and it was given to him by his space contacts, and it was grown to his frequency.
Oh my God. A little bit to your left. Yes. Where is it coming from?
Comes from one of the other planets. Here, while I have you here, I might as well show you this too. Here is the Golden Medal of Honor that was given to George from Pope John the 23rd, 2 weeks before he died, for delivering. George delivered a sealed message from the space people to the Pope, and in May of '63, and he received this medal for it.
Nice. So the Pope knew about everything. The church, everybody knows everything, just not humans, just not regular people.
Well, the church, some people in the church know, not everybody. Let us clear up this point. Just because you are a colonel or a general in the armed forces does not mean that you have access to this information. Only very specific people have access. The church is the same way. Only very specific people have access, and the rest of them go about their business in the usual manner. So it's not something where everybody is holding this secret at the same time. The church does hold many different secrets. They hold the true history of the biblical events. They hold so much in their Vatican archives and underground facilities. And these things they will never show the public, because this will then cause an upset in their power structure. Yeah. So that is one of the things that you asked about. Why is it that we're not told? It is very simple, and I mentioned this on my YouTube channel. We did a program on why this information is kept secret, and it's very simple. We are micromanaged, right? And so we have a one world government, whether we want to publicly admit it or not. It has been functioning for many, many decades, and it's outside of the jurisdiction of countries, boundaries, nationalities, religions. This core decides world events. And I'm not talking about Illuminati or the Prince of Liechtenstein and these other places. These are just peripheral people because you know their names. The real people you never know. These are just the ones that keep you busy looking at this hand, like Rothschilds and the rest of them, while the real ones are manipulating power. And so we are a managed planet in which we are determined to maintain an economic structure that is dependent first on petroleum, but secondly, now we have manipulated it in half, and now it has become the other half dependent upon militarized industrial manufacturing. The propagation of manufacturing weapons, the United States, the Chinese, the Russians, the French, and the Israelis are the ones that are all making these weapons. Now, you don't really think that they're making weapons so that you can put them in your garage and hide them in the closet. They expect them to be used. Yes. And they want them to be used. So they therefore propagate minor conflicts around the world. So these weapons and this monetary flow continues to happen. They don't want any of this to change. So when you have a beneficial intellectual society that comes to visit us and they say, well, hey, we have free energy. It's your planet, it produces it by the trillions upon trillions of volts. All you need to do is to have the device in order to collect it, and you can power your house, your car, everything. You no longer need to buy energy for anything. Can you imagine what the economic market would do? It would collapse.
Yeah.
Right?
Some
and
people,
so, yeah.
excuse me, some people claim that these core people that are, well, they are not people. First of all, they say that these who are manipulating, they are reptiles, they are coming from those families. Let's clarify that. What do you think these entities are? Are they human?
Yes. So you have a cadre or a group of people of this world who want to maintain power, and they want to maintain it generationally. So throughout their lives, their children's lives, their next generations, they want to be the masters of industry and wealth on this planet for however long it lasts. Then you have a group of non-beneficial extraterrestrials who are human just the same. They're not reptiles or crayfish or manta rays or any of this. This is all science fiction nonsense again. And they work in collusion with this group in order to maintain that power structure. How, you may ask, is very simple. Let's say that there is something that you want. Let's say whatever it is. And I come along and offer you what you want. And if you want it bad enough, you will agree to whatever the terms are so that you get it. They say that most people have a price. There's very few of us that cannot be bought. I cannot be bought. I don't care how many billions they offer me. The answer is no. But most people say yes, because their attitude is, if I don't take it, somebody else will. Right? And so by offering us our weaknesses, they determine two things. One, the price that we're willing to sell our souls for. Right? And two, the character of the individual. And so you then become a very easy pawn in order to get what the desired outcome is. And so they give these people, whether it's power, political office, the richest man in the world, blah, 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 blah. They give them what they have an ambitions for. But there is always a price. Always.
Huge one. The soul. Do you still think they are humans?
Yes.
Because the first group, when it runs the power from generation to generation, let's say from ancient times, and some people say it's a Rothschild family, it's different kind of families. And there is this other group you mentioned that offers something for the big price. But those people, let's say they want millions, they want a good life. They don't care where is that leading to, but they just want a big house, for example, or fame, or just like industry of art. A lot of artists sign up contracts that actually it's a sign for their soul, because the artist is more worth dead later on.
Of course.
That's right. So it's leading straight to actually buying the artist to the death and creating it. So many, we watch that. Yeah.
Yeah, but there's a very simple solution to all of that, and that's called no.
Yes.
If you are, let's say, an artist, and you are true to your talent and your field, artistry, is it not the creation of your inner expression? So if you are creating something from your inner expression, that creation, the manifestation or the end result of that creation, whether it happens to be on the wall or on the canvas or what have you, is an expression of you. So are you selling yourself? If somebody comes along and says, I think that's really pretty, I would like to have a copy, well, that's a different story. But if you're trying to promote something where you are mass promoting this in order to make a living, Well, I think history is pretty clear when you look back at all the artists and sculptors over the last 2,000 years. None of them died wealthy.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. But also any field, they maybe are rich, but there's a lot of suicide rate among them. The pressure is high. They are forced. And those deals, anytime I look at it closer, at the artist, those deals are always made in a sense like we provide everything, that group, but you are continuously paying debt because we invested in you billions of dollars, and now for the next 30 years you got to pay it off. So you got to give the concerts, and a lot of artists do that. They do not like it. Continuous going from concert to concert is exhausting.
Mm-hmm. Well, once again, you are producing an expression of you, and I think it's important, the distinction that there is a difference between emotion and inner expression. Many artists produce due to emotional conditions either from family or from relationship or this or that. Look at Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. It's written because the maid left him and what have you. But the idea here is that when we produce from emotion, we become drained because we are pulling that energy out of us and producing something. And it may be very good or very nice or unique, but it is very innerly expensive. But when you produce from the soul, that has unlimited energy. It is not something that you can take away. It is not something that you can diminish. So when you produce something, you can sit back and you can look at it and say, this is the expression of what I see. Like, for instance, if you look at the Mona Lisa, you can see that the artist has, Da Vinci has imposed upon it many different expressions of not only the character herself, but him and what have you. But it is not painted in the emotional state of frenzy. And I'm afraid that oftentimes art becomes nothing more than an emotional outlet, and thereby it causes greater disillusionment, because when you look at something that has put so much emotional energy into it, you pick up that frequency and you feel that discomfort or that imbalance yourself. So you've not done anyone any good. All you've done is multiplied the dissatisfaction that you yourself has felt, right? And so, we have to look at things at a more natural inner peace type of exhibition. And that's what the space people do. They don't do anything in frenzy. They don't do anything in emotionalism. They do it for the sheer joy of the expression of their inner soul. And that way, when you look at their paintings or sculptures, it seems like it's almost living, because from that standpoint, it practically is.
I have to ask you, did you see it? Because you had enormous amount of experiences with extraterrestrials. Did you see their art?
Well, I would have to think about that. I have seen art where they have participated in here on this planet, but I have not been in the ships, and I have not gone to other worlds, and so therefore I cannot say that I have seen it directly. I have seen it described. George described a painting inside the mothership, which they classify it as life itself. And if I would have to guess, and that's all it is my personal guess, it is a replication of of sheer compassion, understanding, and humility coming from the expression of that painted individual. That represents, it's not life as we say, well, is this twirling around kind of thing. No, it is the manifestation of life through the vehicle.
That's very important. That's very important what you're saying, because people are into art, paintings, anything, songs, but they perceive it, just like it's market, because everybody buys it, so they buy it. Someone throws something and it's sold for 50 millions, right? And I saw those kind of things in MoMA in New York museum, and some of them were great, inspired. I could feel the essence of something profound, and some you could see that it just was told by other people, hey, this is great art and this is why people buy it. So they lost this connection to themselves. Like if you put that painting in your house, it emanates certain qualities.
Yes,
you bring it to yourself, so make sure it's the right kind of quality.
Right. And these days we have what we have considered to be art, whether it's Andy Warhol or any of these people. Basically, it is, once again, it is the emotionalism of the mind, where things are just thrown at the canvas and just splattered all over the place, and it's basically chaos. And so therefore, it has, if it was done by a 10-year-old child versus somebody with a name, everybody would walk by and say, well, it looks like a 10-year-old child did it. But since somebody has a name and puts it at the bottom of it, that's what they buy it for. They buy it for two reasons: the investment, and more importantly, look at me and what I have.
Yes, to show off.
Yeah.
Simply that, yes. Okay, let's go back to, actually, we are in the space with the connection to the space people, because they do pay attention to art. Art is not so honored here on Earth. You have to have a name, and someone else decides. Those on the top decides what is good art, what not. It's a completely different way of differentiating. Why the space people seems like they do follow the qualities, what art is and other things. And our life really counts.
Yes. And that is because they associate to nature. They associate to natural conditions. And so when they produce a piece of art, they wish to produce it as closely to the natural expression. This is showing their reverence for the creative force, or God, or whatever you want to call it, who has produced what they are copying into art. So they wish to fortify and support and replicate that great expression to the best of their ability, because it becomes their expression. They realize that God resides within them, right? You are a flicker of the flame of eternal soul that runs throughout the cosmos. No matter where you go, it's everywhere. Just the same as no matter where you go, human beings in their various forms are everywhere, spread through the cosmos. And each one exhibiting a different state of expression. We can call the planetary bodies basically schools. So for instance, let's say here on Earth, we represent elementary school, and it's a ladder, and you have a certain amount of grades. You can go up and you can go down depending on what you decide, and in the event of learning. And when you have learned successfully what you need, you will then transgress from this school or this planet to the next one, which represents the higher school. So you go from high school to college to university, and you continue through the cosmos endlessly. And so they are able to travel unrestricted throughout the cosmos. So they, unlike us, who do nothing more than theorize and hypothesize, our scientists we really don't know hardly anything, because all they do is make a supposition and then they tack their name behind it because that's what they're after, recognition. And then they tell you that the other end of the galaxy looks like this when they haven't a single clue whatsoever. Well, the space people, they get to travel there. They are the knowers while we are just the imaginators. And so therefore, their knowledge comes, the composition of their beliefs and their knowledge and science and religion is all combined into one thing. This is how they live. And we find that very difficult, because we believe that if I don't go out there and express my individualism, then I'm nobody. So then you have I never forget, I got off the train in Leipzig with my niece many years ago, and there was a Goths convention, and we had no idea. You know, this whole train station was walking with people that looked like vampires, and she had never seen anything like it, and neither had I. So we're going, holy moly, what's going on? But these people claim, well, I want to express my individualism. However, they are all duplicating each other. So how can you be individual? You're just one against of another crowd.
You talk about fashion. Someone put this particular blouse, now everybody has to have it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And because it's a name on it. So if it's not Versace or something, people don't come. So they buy it for the name of someone. So-called gods of fashion. Those, yeah.
And the funny thing is, they wear it with the tag outside so people can see the tag. Yes. But yet, if you go on the black market, I flew many times to China, Beijing, and Shanghai. They replicate all that stuff. It looks pretty good, you know, and nobody knows the difference.
Yeah, but it is a sort of a kindergarten, elementary school. Yeah. When you look at it that way, how those extraterrestrials, I don't know how to call them, space people, view us from this perspective. I need to ask you that because even that crystal you showed me, that beautiful crystal, you said it was adjusted vibrationally to George Adamski frequency. So again, it wasn't just the item created for the beauty of it. There was a certain purpose in the art and craft and whatever they did for him, the offering of that crystal. And this is special. This is really special, because if someone just, creates anything and throws in the market just to sell, people get burned out very quickly. Those artists, that's one thing. And another thing, it has no value. But if you create a value, if it's general, that's what I'm thinking, because I am an artist actually, and you leave it as something that you create, you put their energy of, I don't know, love, for example. It exists on its own, and it raises generally the vibration of the people who may copy it, have it at home, print it for themselves, and so on. That's what I believe, and this is very, very similar. Maybe this is part of the message of the space people for us, to follow that path more.
When you create something with love, you are imparting two things. You are imparting your thought. Your thought carries frequency, and that frequency saturates the area around you, right? So for instance, let's say you are sitting in this room for a number of years, creating art the way you love and what have you, and you do it with all your mind, body, and soul. Now you pass away. Other people who are receptive can come into that room and can feel your past energy, not your current energy, because it has gone to a new form, but your past energy has saturated into the art, into the wall, into the paint, into the environment around you. And that's what you are tuning into and feeling like a radio, right? And so when you put that feeling of love, and let's be clear, love is a highly misunderstood term.
Yes.
Right? Because what is love? When you have love, you have compassion for all things. You have respect, you have understanding, you have patience, you have all these virtues. For us, love has degraded into basically sexuality.
Yeah,
Right?
and wanting
Right?
something for someone, from someone.
That's right. That's right. It has come to a selfish a selfishness rather than a non-selfishness. It was said that you must learn to give of yourself unselfishly. That means you not only do not expect anything in return, the thought never comes into your mind, and you are not doing this in order, even for the smallest notion of recognition, because the expression of what you did is already all the payment that you could possibly want or receive. Right?
Perfect.
So we have taken love and make it into sexuality. People will say, well, I love you 1 second, and then when you don't give them what their ego wants, 3 minutes later, they hate you. So that means they have no idea what the heck they were talking about.
Yeah, but you said it perfectly, because I'm also a writer, and many years ago, someone was telling me, why don't you write a book of politics? That sells. Why don't you write? Nobody wants your books, right? But I could never compromise myself to write about something I did not really feel. And now, years later, I have amazing, due to that channel, of course, amazing emails from people who feel the same, who feel similar experience, and they can relate to. And I don't care if it's not millions of people just for the sales, but that's the most beautiful reward. And I hope that what we are talking about here, it's going to spread the message to people who are confused about what to do in life, how to live it, what is the truth, to come to those simple feeling and differentiations.
Yes, because that is what we have lost. We have separated ourselves from nature and natural thinking. That doesn't mean that you put on a loincloth and go run into the woods and live under a bunch of sticks. No, that is stupid. But if you go and walk in nature and you silence your mind so that you can receive the impressions of the environment around you, you will find that you become much more aware of everything. Because let's face it, awareness is what we strive for. It does many things for you. It helps to educate you. It helps you connect to your innerness. It helps to protect you. Because when you're aware and you're walking down the street and you've had a feeling that something's not right at the corner, I better not go there, you turn around and walk the other direction. Whereas most people will ignore that feeling, which is their inner self, and they walk right into a situation that can be very detrimental. Or as you've heard, people who have refused to get on airplanes because they thought that there was going to be an issue, and there ended up being an issue. Right?
Yeah,
And so awareness is what they on other worlds live. Every moment for them is awareness. They don't worry about the past, that's over. The future is the very next nanosecond. The next breath you take is the future. Right? And we are so hypnotized by well, what's going to happen to me in the future? Or is there another dimension where somebody looks like me is walking around? Or is this or is that? And we spend absolutely not a moment where we are at right now. And that's what counts.
You know, I can almost hear extraterrestrials saying, you meet us in silence. maybe they are accompanying us right now by this recording. I would hope so, because they are very telepathic beings, right?
Yes. Yeah, that brings about the next thing. Telepathy is a natural form of language because all of nature uses it. Right? If you have animals, you will find out right away that the animals are using telepathy. They're not speaking your language, obviously, because everybody speaks a different language. The words mean nothing, but it is a picture language. They picture you, they picture what they're looking for. And if you give it a second, you can sit there and understand what they're picturing. I have a rescue husky that I got a couple years ago. And he will sit in front of me and look at me. And here are the variable options. I want some to eat. I want some water. I want you to pet me. I want you to let me out. This, and this. However, what he wants, he visualizes. And you will immediately pick up that picture and say, oh, yeah, it's none of the other things. It's this. And so, and when you acknowledge that, he jumps up and he's ready to do it because he knows it. Well, picture language works the same way, telepathy, between us. If I want to talk to you, I picture your face and I picture the telephone or I picture the computer. If you're receptive, you will receive my image and the thought to call me. Oh, there you go, you call me, it works, there it works. And so it is something that is within all the natural environment. And you can use it within the cells of your own body too, because you can communicate with the cells of your own form, and so you can determine what health conditions you're at. Your body does it automatically. You cut yourself. Well, how does the cells know to go to this area to repair the cut? Because they are telepathically sent to that area to reconstruct it. So all of nature uses telepathy. And that's not channeling. Nobody speaks our body. There's not a space person anywhere that I am familiar with, and I've met enough of them. They come and speak to you directly. If they want to contact you, they know that you and I are not highly trained in telepathy. It is not our, what do we call it, Geheimsprache. And so, therefore, they will send you the thought maybe to be at a certain place at a certain time or to be aware, and then they come to you physically because they know that in order to get the message of value across, they never do it mysteriously. They never do it in a state of confusion. Why would you bother then? They come physically and speak to you so that you understand it and you can relay the fact that you understand it. Nobody speaks through you. This is all inner psychosis. We are talking to our own subconscious and recessed memories and all kinds of other things that are in there. But space people don't do that.
Let's get into that because I have so many questions here. We're not going to touch on everything, but session by session, I hope so. But the telepathy, I didn't plan to talk about it. Yet, many times, and probably it happened to everyone at certain point in life, even if we do not practice telepathy. But me, myself, years ago, when I didn't know what telepathy was, I had a dream about someone wanting to tell me something. The next day, of course, the person called, and before he started to talk, I said, you wanted to tell me this and this and this. Mm-hmm. And the person was very, very, in shock, of course. That happened all the time. And I completely didn't know what that was. Just, I'm crazy because how do I know? I don't know how I know, but I know. So that's one thing. Another thing is how the space people connect with us. We get subtle information from different, races maybe, and they maybe are able to connect to some of us by giving us sort of information in the dreams, in the intuitive form, in the thoughts. We picture of something, and we will get to that very soon because not only me, as it turned out, I had many dreams about spaceships, aliens, and first of all, I was thinking, okay, I'm maybe inspired by the film, by whatever is in the collective about it, and that could be true too. So we need to be careful about it. But many of us had this, and now is this from beautiful part of that into misinformation about the scary part,
Right.
especially about the grays. So they had the dreams, me too, about giving birth to babies, about being taken on the ship, abductions, experiments. People were sending me their parts of their body with, you know, after the night, you know, some cuts or implants and so on. We all, well, not all, but most of us had it in a form of dreams. We remember it later. Some go to regression. Some were very, they had very good experiences. Like, for example, years ago, I had a dream that I gave a birth to a boy somewhere, and the next few seconds he was an adult, and I was giving him talisman for the journey, because I knew I'd never see him in this lifetime again. He would be a pilot. So that was a very nice dream, very sci-fi, very cool. But then I heard people who had those kind of dreams as well. Then I was taken on the spaceship in the dreams, and they were showing me how they make babies, like in the laboratory and so on. And I wanted to prove it, like call my friends in astral dream, like, hey, this is real. Look at that. This is how they do it. But it wasn't negative in this sense. But there were some stories about taking blood from people, from the cows. You know, you heard all those stories. And then it was this profound interview, probably John Lear or some name like that, about that the Greys, they don't have a digestive system and they cannot reproduce because they're not human anymore, but they follow that line in the future that humans will follow, transhumanism. So that's why, and they come back in time. Can you comment on that? What is not true here?
Well, let's start with thing number one. You had an impression, and you said that the next day the person contacted you and you knew what they were going to discuss, or vice versa. You have to have the outlet in order to express. So for instance, if you have a thought, and this, what it means that by the expression, if you know thyself, you shall know all things. You have to know what is you, what is part of the environment, and your environment at the time, whether you are stressed, tired, sleep deprived, emotional, or whatever. Then you have to be aware that all the other people are broadcasting their so-called feelings as well. Are you picking up some of that? Is that coming through as dissatisfaction and what have you? So when the time you look at the entire equation, you have about 6 different factors that you have to be aware of. For instance, if I watch some stupid horror movie and I can't sleep for 3 nights, it's because my mind has become impressed, purposely so, by the images that are projected into me by subliminal projection, right? And we are using subliminal projection in advertising, so that when you look at the television screen and it says, oh, Coke is beautiful, drink Coke, blah, 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 and all of a sudden you have a thirst for Coke and there you run and have one. Subliminal suggestion. And so, and we are also experimenting, the powers that be, with frequency projection machines. They are very much like the Germans once started to construct, which was basically a very large tuning fork mounted on a truck, in which they ran the electrical current through. And then, you know, if you take a tuning fork and you hit it and then you point it at the glass, that vibration you don't hear, but it will bust the glass. Yeah. So it's very real. And
are you talking here about 5G?
Well, I mean, you know, there's so much about, I'm surrounded by 5G and I don't I don't seem to feel or think I have any difference, but it may be different for other people, and I will not disparage their thinking. But the idea here is that you have to know what comes from you and what comes from the outside. And you have to understand that the outside influence may be 4 or 5 of these factors versus your 1 or 2. So it has predominance. It has greater energy, so you will be more subjected to follow that. For instance, we have experimented by satellite with color frequency projection. And as the satellite crosses across the globe, we have projected certain color frequency projections, and we have found out that all the people that were bombarded by that started to act in the same way. So for instance, this might not be the case with red, but just to use an example, when they projected red, everybody became highly agitated and were ready to go and create acts of violence, without having any second thought about it. It was suddenly a rage overtook them, and off they would run. Whereas if you were a cognizant being, you would say to yourself, well, hell, this isn't me, so consequently, I'm not going to act upon it. But most people aren't that way. So we have a multitude of experiments that are always run upon us. They are electromagnetic, they're particle beam projection, microwave projection, and so on and so forth. And we bombard and we practice upon the populations in order to determine how we can conduct population control, mass movements, dissatisfaction, and so on and so forth, because the powers that be may have a lot of control, but one thing that they are terrified of is that it is our rampant, irresponsible overpopulation, because pretty soon, there are more sheep than wolves, and pretty soon there's a possibility that they will, run over everybody. So anyway, but to go back to these things that you mentioned here, nobody comes and does anything to your cows. For instance, we have biological laboratories here in the U.S., whether it's Agua Dulce, there's a couple in Colorado, there's one in Long Island, and there are many other very secret ones that the military have constructed. And they're constructed like upside-down wedding cakes. So they get narrower the deeper they go. And these laboratories, we conduct experimentation on animals and people, not any different. Just like you read recently in the news that the Japanese have been accused again, and it's no secret, we've known it for decades, with biological experiments on their Chinese prisoners, just as we know that has happened in Europe, and it happened in the Soviet Union. So we cannot always point the finger at one particular group, no matter how horrific it is. And but from a standpoint of mankind, we are just about as corrupt and bizarre and malfeasant as the next one. There's no one group that's any better than the other. So I give you an example. In '67, my father was in television in Baltimore, and this thing of early cattle mutilations came up. And he said this has nothing to do with extraterrestrials. Nobody travels 400 light years and is 4,000 years more advanced than you to come here and chop up your cows. So the producer said, well, I know one of the ranchers out in Colorado. Let's give him a call. So they called him. The rancher said, no, it had nothing to do with any extraterrestrials. I have people here in lab coats and military uniforms that are running around and taking samples and doing this and doing that. And that is because not only do we experiment within the confines of laboratories, we do experiments on open populations as well. I don't know if you remember in the late 60s, I think it was 68, the CIA got caught putting biological elements into the New York water system. And so when you hear stories about horrific stuff, I guarantee you it comes from right here and nowhere else. Because in order to progress to the point of deep space travel, You are looking at thousands of years ahead of us in advancement. We just barely get to the moon in most respects, and then we just aim stuff out into space and shoot it out there. But successful travel is an entirely different thing. When you look at a new picture from the Webb telescope and you look in at a deep space shot, the entire vista is covered with stars and star systems, galaxies, everything. Well, how do you know where you're going? When you go out in space far enough from Earth, you are covered three-dimensionally, forward, behind, up, and down, by this same unfathomable vastness. If you don't know what you're doing, you're finished, you're lost, right? And so to do it successfully requires an immense technology and understanding. You cannot progress 4,000 years scientifically and still remain at the caveman status. Go into the Mato Grosso or go to Papua New Guinea and you see people who live very primitively, but they don't have the understanding of all the more technologically advanced things because they're not to that point of evolution of the mind yet, right? So these space people can come and they can orbit us, sit in the comfort of their lounge, and use their instrumentation right now to see both of us exactly as we sit here, listen to our conversation, record every thought that goes through your head, and record your functions down to your subatomic level in your body. It's like the old saying goes, if I want to eat chicken, I don't chase the chicken all over the courtyard first because it's going to be tough, right? So they can do everything without coming down here and doing anything to you. And they have been doing that for thousands of years. I mean, my new book that I'm going to finish here as quickly as I can, I have got a litany. The first half of it is describing my family and my life's involvement in this field and all the many different things, the meetings with the scientists and stuff like that. That's the first half. The second half deals with this UFO subject and the misinformation that is being propagated in it. And so it's, to some they will like it, and the other ones they're not going to be happy at all, but that's too bad. Because
so
I think
those cows, sorry, to just come back to that, to finish that topic, those cows, actually, these were people, military people, who were draining those cows of blood?
Sure. In fact, as I said in the book, it wasn't too long ago that the ACM, the Atomic Energy Commission, AEM, was exposed and sued for the release of underground radiation and above ground radiation that killed hundreds of thousands of livestock. And they went frantically from ranch to ranch to buy that livestock, dead or alive, so that it wouldn't get out in the public. Now, when you take radiation and you give radiation, high levels of radiation, not only inside through the water and through the air, but outside as well, then you start to get conditions of the body of any biological entity that starts to degrade because of that, right? And so there are always alternative explanations versus what we have taken now, and we have blamed everything on extraterrestrials. If I don't feel good today, it's ET. I know a girl who told me, oh, well, in the office, the invisible extraterrestrials are throwing pencils and pens at me, and I just know it. So I have a bad day, it's ET problem. If this happens, it's ET problem. You know, and everything we blame upon them because, hey, how convenient it is. You don't have to prove any of it.
They don't protect, they're not going to say anything. So these grays that are, do you think it's true, this theory that grays are us from the future, that maybe chosen? No. Okay.
First of all, there is no such thing as time travel. Time travel is a fallacy. And I'll tell you why.
Okay.
Let's say you decide that you want to go back and have lunch with Julius Caesar. By the way, he wasn't a very nice person to begin with.
I was
secondly, but secondly, everything that has composed him and that time frame are molecules and elements and atoms, and they have all dispersed. When they threw Julius on the funeral pyre and burned him, all his elements went into the atmosphere. Some people breathed them, some of them went into the vegetables, some of them went into the ocean, but they were dispersed everywhere, right? So in order to reconstruct the past, you would literally have to destroy or deconstruct the present in order to retrieve all the materials that constructed that past in order to reassemble them. So you couldn't have both. You just cannot go into something and slip through an imagined wormhole and end up in the past or in the future. But what you can do is you can study the past by going to the worlds that are still at that level of development. If I want to know how we looked primitively, I can go to the Mato Grosso in the Amazon jungle. I can go to Papua New Guinea or to Australia, and I can see indigenous people who are still living the life that perhaps we lived tens of thousands of years ago. Did I travel into the physical past? No.
You're traveling in your mind, right?
I traveled.
Traveling in the mind.
I traveled physically to the peoples that are still living that way. So
Okay.
if I wanna see what it looks like when the dinosaurs roam, I go into space and I go to a star system which is still in the evolutionary process, and there is a planet where the dinosaurs are. That is still part of their process then, as we had maybe 100 million years ago. And I can look at that and study it and say, okay, I understand how that works because I see it for as it is. I didn't travel in time. I traveled to a place where time is reflected by where they are living right there.
Mm-hmm. It's an interesting concept because there's so many things about time travel. And I would say personally that we can time travel in our mind to the certain time and pick up the glimpses of what happened there. Just like we remember our past reincarnations, you know. So we can go back in time.
There you go. Now, there you go. Traveling in our memory. First of all, memory is like a universal book. All that has ever transpired is recorded in the book of memory.
Akasha Chronicles, that's what you told me.
And you can, since you have lived lifetimes in these places, if you are receptive and if you receive the trigger, past lives are lives that you remember in flashback for their significant, the word I'm looking for is significant experiences. So for instance, if you spent the last lifetime living on the farm and tilling the field and feeding the cows, day after day after day, there are no exceptional experience other than the repetition of what you did to remember. But if you spent the last lifetime and things of significance happened to you, either good or bad, then you will get flashbacks of that. You will find you have affinity for certain places in the world, and unless you recognize and acknowledge past lifetimes or reincarnation, you will not know where to put it. So we have, and the children are most acceptable to this because their mind is uncluttered. And there are many children that will say, well, mommy, daddy, I remember this and this. And of course, the parents get horrified. They drag them to the psychologist, who does nothing more than brainwash them, because according to psychology, that doesn't exist, and so on and so forth. I give you an example. At the age of 2 in my sleep, I spoke fluent Latin, ancient Latin, Roman Latin. And my parents recorded it too. And I've always had an affinity for places like Rome, places like Egypt, Greece, all places because we have lived many lifetimes in many different places, not only on this world, but on other worlds. And so we carry that memory of something better from the other worlds, and we then strive to return to it. All right. So reincarnation is extremely valuable. And it was Jesus who taught reincarnation. He never taught resurrection. The church changed those words. When Jesus stood on the mountain of transfiguration before his disciple, and he appeared to them as Solomon and Elijah and all these other people, he was showing them who he had been in the past. And we are all capable of that because he said, there are those of you who will do greater things than I have done.
That's an interesting one because, yeah, that's like changing the whole concept of the church, right? Because people do fight for it. Like, yeah, there is a topic of reincarnation in the Bible, they look for it, but actually changing just the wording already shows so much. I want to touch so many topics here because now we go through time travel, and I would dig deeper into that. Maybe we're going to take a pause here, and because I have no idea how to even title that one, but I will assume this is like a great introduction to the topics that are available and we can discuss together. Also, if anybody out there have a question, please write under in the comments so we can continue. What is the most interesting topics for you? I want to touch on a Roswell. I want to touch about this interview with the alien, what's going on there, about those grays. I would love to continue with you on these grays, about this digestive system. Like, who are they? Who are those grays? Maybe you still can touch on that one. And we will deepen all those topics also in the further sessions with you. Who are these grays?
I knew John Lear. John Lear and I used to fly airliners together, and he knew of my father very well. Unfortunately, John was a person who swayed any direction that the camera would go to. So, for instance, when this whole nonsense about us not going to the moon first came out, he was the first one to jump on the bandwagon. So I said to him, John, you and I both know this is garbage. And so I pulled out the original 11 by 15 Hasselblad NASA photos that we received in the 70s from NASA. And I met him in Laughlin, Nevada, one of the UFO convention. And I sat at the table there with his daughter and he at lunch. And I showed him these pictures. And I said, you tell me that this isn't real. And he looked at them picture after picture. And he said, they're absolutely real. So I said to him, John, then why do you go out and promote misinformation?
What did he say?
He didn't say anything.
Okay, now you say something big because people argue about, was the moon real or not? There's still so much argument about it. You're saying it happened.
Of course it did. First of all, number one, you have the space program that started with Mercury, then went to Gemini, Atlas, and Apollo. And all these craft launched and was filmed launching and was witnessed by the ground crew and all the population there at Cape Canaveral, which is now Cape Kennedy, and watched them go into space. With Apollo, ground-based telescopes, professional and amateur, positioned around the entire world, tracked Apollo to the moon. Visually tracked it. And so I confronted one of these guys and I said, of course you know that, right? Because most of these deniers come from a generation now that have no brain, zero. They read it on the internet, they read it on Facebook, and they're going to repeat it because they don't know what they're talking about. And so I said to him, well, you do know that that was visible all the way. Well, then he hemmed and hawed, and then he said, well, there was nobody in it. I said, make up your mind. What story you're going to use? There are over 8,000 photographs of Apollo alone, not to talk about the Lunar Orbiter 1 through 4 series. And films, motion picture films, of us going to the moon. Mount Palomar, which is not but about an hour from here, from where I live in Vista, has the 200-inch telescope, has photographs of the Sea of Tranquility of the equipment that Apollo left behind in the crater. So you have all of this, plus you have something that's even more important. None of these people, the deniers, know what they're talking about, and I can prove it. One, the moon has a greater gravity than we are telling the people. And that's in my father's book, We Discovered Alien Bases on the Moon. And its gravity is 64% that of Earth. And we can prove it because the neutral gravity point between the moon and the Earth at 1/6 gravity would be at 22,000 miles. The real neutral gravity point is 44,000 miles. And since gravity expands exponentially, by using the same mathematical equation, you get 64% gravity. So how do we know that's true? Because when astronaut Young, wearing his full spacesuit and gear, weighed 360 pounds. Under 1/6 gravity, he would only weigh 60 pounds. So he tries to jump, and using all his might, he can only jump 1.5 feet high. Well, we got soccer players that can jump 3 times that high, or football players or basketball players here on Earth, right? So we know there is a greater gravitational pull, and that's just on the front side. On the back side of the moon, the back side is not susceptible to the huge elongation pull of the Earth. So consequently, it is even stronger on the backside. Next, the Apollo.
So it's not equal. Okay, interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
And you also know that the backside of the moon, which people call erroneously the dark side of the moon, the backside of the moon, for 2 weeks out of the month it's lit, and for 2 weeks it's dark. It's not always dark. Half the time it's lit. That's a scientific fact. So now, Apollo leaves equipment on the moon, 1971. I have the article, and it shows water geysers spraying out like Baden-Baden, spraying out of the surface for 14 hours of water. Now, you don't hear water again for another 35 years. Then the articles come out and say, oh, well, we found moon. Well, you already knew that in 1971. All we're doing is being quiet about it, and then coming out 35 years later after another generation has passed, and then restating the same information without upgrading it. Here comes the better part. Not a year ago, they say the moon, the top layer has enough oxygen to sustain 1 billion people for 100,000 years. The next thing they say is we have found what is called Goldilocks zones on the moon, craters. And at the bottom of the crater, the constant temperature, 63 degrees Fahrenheit, which is what, about 16 or 17 Celsius. Never changes. So now you have 17 Celsius, you got water, you got gravity. Do you have atmosphere? Yes, you do. Because when you look at the NASA pictures, you can see the atmosphere on the moon. And so atmosphere, even though it's very thin, and you can see from the pictures that we supplied the public, all of them with their NASA catalog pictures, that there's clouds, there's mists, there's water vapor, there are moving vehicles, moving lights, all admitted by NASA themselves. In the 1966 document, The Chronology of Lunar Observations, they list the same things. And so consequently, now when you have a light atmosphere, that atmosphere has to move, just like wind moves on the surface here. That's why when they planted the American flag and it started to do this, flutter, it's because you had lunar wind moving it, not because it was in a studio. So all these deniers are speaking from total inexperience, total absence of any fact, and they just make up it because one person asked Stanley Kubrick, who produced 2001: A Space Odyssey, do you think you could duplicate that? And he says, well, I don't know, maybe. And so they then said, oh, well, it's all duplicated now.
Fantastic. I'm so glad that we talked about it. I never planned this. To make precise title, because I have only 100 signs here, and I would love that people hear about it. Let's make a pause and do a part 2. I will stop recording now and encourage everyone to please ask questions. And I hope we will continue and to answer everything which you would love to hear straight from the source, from Glenn. Glenn, thank you so much for the part 1. Here below will be the links for anybody who would love to connect with you. And we are moving on to the part 2. So bye everyone, and look forward to our part 2. Thank you.
Thank you.